Some may think the behavior of ancient Egyptians is far removed from that of the modern world, but when it comes to the basics of love, sex and marriage, their behavior is rather familiar. They displayed the same doubts, fears and motivations, and all that separates the ancient Egyptians from the modern world is how such emotions were acted upon. Intimacy in ancient Egypt played an important role in religion and mythology. Like people everywhere, Egyptians had affairs and suffered from lovemaking problems, which they treated with magic. Many people select Egypt as their vacation destination because it is an exotic location and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of Egypt is the Giza pyramids. All aspects of life, including intimacy, were governed by strange and weird beliefs in ancient Egypt. We present to you some of the strange sexual customs that existed in ancient Egypt on this occasion. Subscribe to our channel for more content like this where you may discover various cultures' practices. While the Christian view that the cosmos was formed by one God contrasts with Egyptian belief that the world was created by many gods, the tale that the Egyptians disseminated about the beginning of the world is quite odd. The Egyptians had their own creation myths, just as several other nations. Egypt's population had a wide variety of deities they worshipped, and they spread a strange creation tale. The very first Egyptian god was Atum, who created himself. He had no wife, so in order to beget his children, Shu and Tefnut, he masturbated. The sexual rituals that the Egyptians performed gave rise to stories because they thought that masturbation was the act that gave rise to life. In actuality, masturbation was a common part of these rites. In addition to being a representation of life and fertility, the Nile River was used by the Egyptian pharaohs for ritual masturbation. Instead of viewing life's events as taking place in a linear order, he saw the world in a circular pattern. Numerous Egyptian myths contain tales about fertility because the Egyptians were so preoccupied with conception and creation. The god Min was the primary male fertility god and par excellence associated with intimacy in ancient Egypt. He had a permanently erect phallus and wore a feathered headdress. Men suffering from impotence would make offerings of phallic figurines to the god. He was associated with lettuce as Egyptian lettuce emitted a white milky sap similar to semen. The term inundation was employed by the Egyptians to describe these floods as well as offspring, seed semen, their own seed, and the floods of the Nile because they perceived similarities in the attributes that ultimately pertain to fertility and the beginning of new life. The Nile is a river that frequently caused localized flooding. The myth we just described gave rise to another one with a sexual undertone. I add a lot of strange sexual elements to the narrative of Seth and Horus. The most accurate depiction of Egyptian life is the ongoing fight between the two gods Horus and Satan. The Egyptians had their own creation myths, just as several other nations. Egypt's population had a wide variety of deities they worshipped, and they spread a strange creation tale. The story has a component with the Christian understanding of how the world came into existence. At the beginning, there was nothing at all. The Egyptians thought that the formation of the universe was the task of the only living god, known as Atum, who masturbated and as a result gave birth to a pair of twin gods. Christians believe that there is only one God who created the world. The story originated from the depicted intimate rites of ancient Egypt. Masturbation is a common component of ceremonies because the Egyptians believed that it is the process that creates life. As a result of their obsession with conception and creation, the Egyptians included tales of fertility in many of their myths. There were ceremonial masturbations into the Nile River, which was also a representation of life and fertility, among the Egyptian pharaohs. They did not view life as a linear series of events, but rather in a circular format. The Egyptians used the same word, inundation, for floods, children, and seed semen in their own seed since the Nile is a river that frequently causes nearby places to flood. They observed the same characteristics, which essentially have to do with fertility and the birth of new life, in the Nile floods. The myth of Seth and Horus, which contains many strange sexual overtones, is derived from the previously described myth. This myth is also charged with a sexual undertone. The constant conflict between Satan and Horus, two gods who were opposed to one another at all times, is the most accurate representation of Egyptian existence. First of all, Osiris, who was Seth's brother and also the father of Horus, and the two of them quarreled over who should succeed him on the throne. Seth was quite upset when Horus ultimately seized the throne, and as a result, he continuously engaged in combat with Horus. Virginity wasn't really a big deal. The Egyptians didn't particularly value it. Premarital relationships were openly practiced, and as long as they occurred between two single people, there was no stigma associated with being a virgin bride. Additionally, virginity didn't have the same religious meaning as it had for the Romans, who saw virginity among women as being equal to godliness and a sign of sexual purity. If you were a woman, your marriage would essentially tie you into that relationship. Anyway, having extramarital affairs was a significant moral and social taboo in ancient Egypt, since they thought married women were especially precious. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that individuals who committed infidelity faced severe penalties. Consensual relationships with married women might lead to whipping, mutilation, or even execution for both parties. Of course, a married man who had a sexual relationship with an unmarried lady just had to endure a little social shame. In ancient Egypt, only one of two circumstances, childlessness or the wife's infidelity, would permit a divorce. Masturbation was associated with divine mythology. Ancient Egyptian myth did not consider the biology of human birth when creating its gods and goddesses. The first god Atum sprang from nothing, effectively generating himself from a pool of primordialism, according to the cosmos. The god Shu and the goddess Tefnut were spit out of his mouth as he masturbated, and they went on to produce further gods and goddesses as well as additional components of civilization before he began to construct the universe. Male self-pleasure assumed an almost divine quality because the ancient Egyptians considered the masturbation portion of this story to be crucial. Even stories of pharaohs ritually masturbating into the Nile exist. When it comes to indecent imagery, ancient Egyptians were less progressive than ancient Romans. Some erotic imagery did exist, with the Turin erotic papyrus being the most famous example. This papyrus, which is 8.5 feet long and 10 inches high, contains a series of sexual vignettes. 2/3 of the papyrus show a disheveled man having sex with a young woman. It shows various positions, each one more daring and inventive than the last, including one where the couple is engaged in an absurd arrangement on a chariot. Many academics believe that an erotic papyrus was the ancient Egyptians' idea of satire rather than something they perceived as actually sexual or meant to arouse them. Homosexuality and incest. Male sexual satisfaction assumed an almost divine quality because the ancient Egyptians considered the masturbating portion of this tale to be crucial. Even the practice of pharaohs masturbating in public on the Nile has been documented. The ancient Egyptians weren't particularly advanced when it came to pornographic images, unlike the ancient Romans. However, there was some erotic imagery there. The Turin erotic papyrus, which included a series of sexual vignettes reaching 8.5 feet long and 10 inches high, is the most well-known example. The papyrus's second and third thirds show an unkempt man engaging in sexual activity with a young woman. It depicts a variety of situations, each one more daring and imaginative than the last, including one in which the pair is engaged in combat while seated on a chariot. She deceived Seth into ingesting Horus' sperm, which gave Horus the decisive victory in prehistoric Egypt. Incest was commonplace. There is a ton of evidence that notable royal and priestly families were frequently married and engaged in sexual activity with their offspring. They enjoyed the right to engage in behavior that was outlawed for regular people. The Egyptian king supported this custom in a number of ways and thought that this type of surrender was very normal. Because his parents were siblings and he was wedded to his half-sister, King Tut was the product of incest. During the Ptolemaic period, 305 to 30 BCE, the practice was even used by King Ptolemy II as a major theme of propaganda, stressing the nature of the couple, which could not be bound by ordinary rules of humanity. DNA testing on 11 mummies that were connected to one of the most well-known pharaohs, Tutankhamun, revealed that he was also the product of an incestuous connection between a brother and sister. This type of connection was followed by major health issues, just like now, and this custom helped the royal family solidify their position. Even though this behavior was against Egyptian law, incest eventually extended to lower-class households and regular people. The results of the DNA analysis show that Tutankhamun was, beyond doubt, the child born from a first-degree brother-sister relationship between Akhenaten and Akhenaten's sister. However, the incestuous relationship between Akhenaten and his sister may have had other consequences. Pharaoh Tutankhamun suffered from congenital equinovarus deformity, also called clubfoot. The tomography scans of Tutankhamun's mummy also revealed that the pharaoh had a bone necrosis for quite a long time, which might have caused a walking disability. This was supported by the objects found next to his mummy. Necrophilia. Due to their obsession with life, the Egyptians gave a lot of thought to the afterlife, or life after death. There are several oddities regarding the ancient Egyptians and death. Necrophilia was a significant aspect of Egyptian culture, as evidenced by the testimony of the renowned Greek historian Herodotus. Herodotus claimed that some people delayed releasing the dead for a number of days because the embalmers had a habit of having sex with the dead. Embalmers did not want to have sex with such corpses because after a few days the body would already start decaying. Herodotus wrote extensively about this practice, thus it is certain that it was widespread in ancient Egypt. In mythologies, necrophilia was frequently depicted. We discussed the narrative between Seth and Horus. Osiris's brother Seth battled with Horus for the throne when Osiris passed away. Anubis, a different god, engaged in intimate activity with Osiris's corpse. The aforementioned god Atum, who created the world by masturbating, is also known as Aura. Horus was born through necrophilia since he was the result of an affair between the deceased Osiris and Isis. Later, Seth and Horus had ongoing intercourse. The practice of necrophilia was prevalent among terrestrial people as well if it existed among the gods, which was to be expected. Circumcision and prostitution. The practice of circumcision existed in Egyptian culture, which was undoubtedly unusual to those who had not experienced it in their own cultures. This habit was eventually accepted by many nations, and throughout the time when the aforementioned Herodotus wrote, it was still practiced by Jews, despite their lack of cultural sophistication at the time. Men from Egypt were circumcised later, but visitors visiting ancient Egypt were exempt from the practice. Rituals were arranged when the men were circumcised. Over 120 men might congregate at that time, according to Herodotus, and it served as some sort of amusement for them. The view of night workers in ancient Egypt. Prostitution was positively seen as a devout act performed for the gods. Contrary to the prestige that prostitutes have now, night workers in ancient Egypt held a place in society that was rather high. Prostitution is still illegal in many nations, therefore young women frequently engage in it behind closed doors and run afoul of the law. The trade of night workers was one that was freely performed in ancient Egypt. They utilized eye-catching red lipstick and other cosmetics in an effort to stand out from other ladies who weren't night workers. They had several tattoos all over their body. Night workers were only permitted to conduct their business in areas designed to please their clients. They were not permitted to do it elsewhere. Night working was a widespread activity in Egypt and was seen as just another sort of trade, albeit one including women who were exploited by powerful royals, as the Egyptians had a psychic understanding of time. They understood gender fluidity to exist. The gods underwent rebirths, their life and death cycles mirroring those of humans. People used to believe that cycle was when changes would occur. Changes used to occur during that cycle, and people used to think that they took place after death in order to have a prosperous afterlife. It was necessary for women to change into men. The majority of what males did in ancient Egypt was done by women, but goddesses also exhibited traits common to the other sex at the period, therefore it was common to find images of them sporting beards. Like now, there was a need for various forms of contraception in ancient Egypt, and the Egyptians enjoyed sex in a very open-minded society. It was common practice to use condoms made from sheep intestines to prevent conception as well as to spread STDs. As a contraceptive, acacia gum was employed. To stop sperm from penetrating, women used to insert the feces of animals like crocodiles into their vaginas. In comparison to other cultures, the Egyptians at the period took contraception very seriously and were extremely advanced. For birth control, they employed acacia gum and crocodile dung. Ancient Egyptians desired some level of parental authority, just like modern societies do now. They developed birth control measures as a result of planning. There is at least some evidence to support the efficiency of one method described in the ancient papyrus, which implies they employed gum derived from acacia tree sap to plug the mouth of the womb during intercourse. Acacia gum includes lactic acid, which is a recognized spermicide. Another technique involved coating the inside of the vagina with a solution of honey and sodium bicarbonate. Another choice was a sort of diaphragm made of honey, acacia, and crocodile dung. According to legend, Cleopatra built a vibrator out of bees. When the Romans arrived, Cleopatra's alleged sexual appetite was the stuff of myth and Shakespeare. With Julius Caesar, Cleopatra had an illegitimate child. Subsequently, she developed feelings for Mark Antony, which ultimately led to her demise. But Cleopatra is said to have found other ways to amuse herself while her sleeping quarters were unoccupied. According to rumors, she allegedly utilized a DIY vibrator made out of angry bees that she either filled with a hollowed-out object or an empty papyrus box. Sources differ. The vibrator rumor has always been untrue, just to be clear. Though not proven, The hypothesis holds that the swarm of bees inside the device would have caused it to vibrate and move, making it perfect for Cleopatra's alleged goals. Particularly in Egyptian hieroglyphics from as far back as 3000 BCE, which show people sleeping with animals, bestiality has a special position in art. The idea of human-animal intercourse as depicted in the glyphs had a divine connection because Egyptian gods and goddesses frequently assumed the form of animals. The ancient Egyptians also thought that physical acts depicted between a human and an animal were less visually offensive than those between two humans. Therefore, some contend that what appears to be hieroglyphic bestiality is a coded illustration of human sex. Incest was uncommon in ancient Egypt, but siblings were frequently married to and had offspring with by Egyptian aristocracy and mythological gods. Brother and sister couplings from Egyptian mythology include the second Nephthys, Osiris and Isis, Shu and Tefnut, and a few more. Because Egyptian nobility enjoys imitating the gods, they regularly wed one another. That will be all for today.